Hello, you are listening to Underscore, a show by the Chicago Graphic Design Club. I am your host, Christian Solorzano, and on today's episode, I will be speaking with Mary Foyder, the founder of MF Collaborative and the director of design of Braver Collective, which is an organization that is an online healing community co-designed by, with, and for survivors of sexual trauma. And she's going to be talking to us about what trauma-informed design actually means in practice, sharing with us stories from her work with organizations like Power to Decide and the Chicago Department of Public Health, and discussing the complexities of working with vulnerable communities. And Mary originally aspired to be a pilot, but then she discovered graphic design at Western Michigan University. And she's going to be talking about her human-centered approach that is collaborative and that really focuses all on sexual health and reproductive justice. So it's a great conversation. We'll also hear about the realities of working in social impact spaces that are grant funded and all of the challenges that come with that, and also running an independent design practice. So it's a great conversation. I think it's a conversation like any others that we've had, because we are not exclusively talking about graphic design, but really we're talking about the byproduct of what graphic design is capable of doing when we're talking about making the world a better place. So, great conversation. This is our last episode of 2025, so I look forward to hearing more from other people in 2026. So as always, thank you so much for your support. It means a lot when you leave us a rating and when you share on social media. So thank you so much. Enjoy, and I will see you in the new year. Thank you. Hello, Mary.
Hello.
It was nice to see you this past week on Tuesday at Firebelly for their holiday party. I complimented you on your outfit. You're always very stylish. The few times I've seen you, you always have a beautiful apparel.
Oh, well, thank you. I
Yeah,
was trying to be a little bit festive.
yeah. Have
My
you?
my style is always trying to be like, what is the most comfortable pajama-like clothing that is
Mhm.
publicly acceptable?
Yeah.
The fact that it looked good, thanks.
And did that interest in fashion? How far back does that go? Was that just always been there?
That's funny because I don't even think of myself as someone who's interested in fashion. I just, want to wear things that are comfortable and that I like. I think ever since I was a kid or a teen, I would like to would make certain things
Hmm.
ridiculous, terrible fashion choices, like sewing buttons all over something, or trying to make sweet outfits to wear to the mall or whatever we
Yeah,
did in the 90s.
yeah. Did you have any like fashion icons or any people that you look to as like an inspiration?
I don't know if it's fashion, but like I love Amy Sedaris and her maximalism of
Hmm.
everything. And I think like ever since I became aware of her many years ago, that I always sort of admired
Yeah.
the kind of ridiculousness inside of something that could look really cool.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so I don't know.
Yeah. That's cool. I always like to see photographs of people when they were a teenager, because I feel like that kind of often what I notice is that those years are so like defining in one's life that I don't know. I feel like I'm still 15 years old, like on the
Yeah,
inside.
I am also 15 years old. And pictures of me, it depends on the age of teenager, because I was a really awkward kid.
Hmm.
Like if you've ever seen the movie Welcome to the Dollhouse, that was me. I was the wiener dog when I was like in junior high. I was just like so painfully awkward. But yeah, then high school was like, all the hair was just in my face. And it was like the baggiest clothes and the punk rock t-shirts and like the Doc Martens and a lot of black. Of
Yeah.
course, I still wear a lot of black.
Were you a troublemaker?
I was a goody two shoes got into a lot of trouble. I don't know. I think there was a, it's a, I definitely got into a lot of trouble, but I didn't get necessarily caught.
Okay.
Um,
Do you want to confess to anything right now?
no, it's funny because I was just thinking about this earlier. I have a dear friend who I met when I lived out in San Francisco for a decade, and I have a
Mm-hmm.
friend there who I met there, though we grew up a mile from each other, and we used to joke because in our hometown, sort of what was normal wasn't necessarily normal for the people we met later when we went to college or we met professionally. Like what was a normal thing to do was like they would be like, "What?" It's like
Yeah.
that's awful. We're like, "No, that's just a Friday." Yeah, of course. But I don't know.
Yeah.
It was pretty normal for Flint, Michigan.
Okay. So talk to us about so you went to school for graphic design, and given that this podcast focuses largely on graphic design, I would love to know like how you got into design, like walk us through all the steps that like led you to getting a BFA in graphic design from Western Michigan University.
That is where I went to school. Well, the reason I went to Western Michigan University was not for graphic design.
Okay.
I decided that at an early age that I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to be an airline pilot, and I went to Western because they had a really good professional pilot program. And I did not apply anywhere else because I did not care. I
Yeah.
think now, in hindsight, I'm like, I probably just wanted to like travel and get out. But I went to that. I chose that school because of the engineering program, and I like was accepted within my end of my junior year in high school. I was like, oh, I know what I'm doing, I'm going
Yeah.
to do this. And of course I went there, and then I realized, oh yeah, I can do calculus, but I hate it. And also
Yeah.
I hate physics, and I was taking FAA regulations and um, technical writing and things. And I had always done art. I had always made art, but I didn't ever know that it could be necessarily something that could be a career. My parents are both teachers, and my mom taught art at an adult ed campus near us. And I didn't want to be a teacher. And then the other thing, I was like, there's maybe like people who draw or illustrate for a living, but I didn't feel like I was that good. And I loved drawing, and I did all kinds of that stuff. I was always making signs for the restaurants I worked at in high school or doing stuff for school. But
Hmm.
I didn't really know, hadn't been exposed to graphic design or anything at that point. So when I was in college, I decided to drop out of the engineering program. I went over and just started taking art classes because it was something I loved. And so I was
Yeah.
taking photography and 2D and drawing and life drawing and stuff, and transitioned into being an art major. And I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. I didn't know. And I met some folks. So Western has a really good, actually now they have a really robust graphic design program, um, an internship program there. But at the time the program was pretty new. And I think I was probably outside like the sculpture lab smoking a cig, as you do. And someone was like, "Oh, are you gonna apply to the new design program?" And I was like, "What's that?" I had no idea. I didn't know. And I kind of looked into it a bit, and I was like, "This sounds really interesting." And then I put together a portfolio and applied while I think I was already a sophomore when I applied to that program, and got in. And it was a little bit wild because like I felt like at the time I had no idea what it was, and then I found out more about it, and I went in, and it was like coming home. And I think it kind of got both of those parts of my brain. Like I got to do creative things and creative problem solving, and it also sort of fed like the engineering-y part of my brain as well. And so like being able to do things creatively but in service of something else, or about getting a message across or storytelling or whatever. And so that really appealed to me. And so once I found that program and started, it was like, oh, like okay, my grades are going up, like I'm engaged, I'm really liking this, like really liking working this way. And so it's cool.
Yeah.
I found myself in that place.
Yeah. So as you were like discovering graphic design, were there any particular stories or what were you most interested in communicating? Or was it just kind of communication in general that stood out to you?
I think I was really interested in the reason behind why decisions were made. I was always, very much driven by, well, why would we do this? Why are we making this choice? What is the right thing for this person? Like, I didn't know, I didn't learn about human-centered design until years later, but I was always trying to sort of approach things with a little bit of a researchness to it, or at least asking lots of questions. A lot of my classmates, they made really beautiful things, and I was not the top person in my class by any means, but I was really just kind of interested in like why we do the things we do and how do we
Mm,
communicate things and how you can create change by communicating something. You can get somebody excited about something by communicating it well and being able to sort of experiment visually um, was sort of the driver there.
yeah. And do you have any, do you ever look back and wonder like Pilot Mary?
No. No. And then when I was working as a consultant and traveling all the time, I was like, I'm so glad I'm not like in charge of
Okay.
driving this bus. I always thought that someday I'd go get my private license, but even now I'm like, yeah, there's like so many other things I'd rather do. But I do love to travel
Yeah.
and there's always the little kid who like did all my science fair projects about how airplanes work and everything, and all that stuff spins through my brain every time I fly for work. It's hilarious. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, Bernoulli's principle, and I'm like, why am I remembering this? Fourth grade.
That's funny. So a lot of the work that you do today, so you study graphic design and then you are in that world. And then today, what is it that you practice? Do you consider yourself to still be a graphic designer, or are you more a design strategist? Like how do you I'm always really fascinated how graphic design becomes such a wide avenue for so many cross-disciplinary things. And one of the beauties that I always find myself contemplating is the fact that like because of graphic design, I feel like I've amassed expertise or some knowledge on like healthcare. Like for many years, I was working in like the pharmaceutical industry and like all these other things. And for you, it seems like your path kind of took you in the social impact space
Mhm.
where you're doing work that is meaningful and that isn't necessarily a for-profit type of, it's not commercial, or at least that's my impression.
I think that's fair. I think that's
Okay.
fair. And I think that's also where my passion lies. It's funny because it's like my existential crisis. What do I call myself now that I'm not just a graphic designer? And I
Mm,
see myself as being a graphic designer, but there are so many graphic designers that I know in Chicago who are just infinitely more talented as when it comes to visual design than I am. But and I love to collaborate with them.
hmm.
I think I don't have that. It's funny, as my career has evolved, I don't have that like short description elevator pitch. I think if someone was to put me on the spot, I'd say design consultant, and then no one would know what that meant. Um, I would say I'm a healing centered trauma informed designer, and then I'd have to explain what that means. I say that I always talk about, I have my own small micro studio, and I work as a collaborative with other designers, and I like to work directly with clients. And depending on what it is we're working on, I can wear a lot of different hats. And like I'm very, very comfortable as a service designer, as a visual designer, stepping into research and co-design facilitation, leading projects and trying to do that in a trauma-informed and healing-centered way. And then I also, work on strategy and brand and visual design, experiential design, and it really kind of depends on what is it that we're trying to
Hmm.
bring to life. And I know that is kind of a cop out, like it's all these things, but I know a
Hmm.
lot of things enough to be dangerous. And then I also know, okay, I can take us this far, but I want to bring in like this person and this person to collaborate on this project. So I really also enjoy building teams and collaborating with others because I just feel like it's so important in the work that we do and the work that I do that I'm always learning from other people because there's so many different ways of approaching things and new perspectives. And so like that's always really important to my practice as well. I would say that when I worked my last full-time job where I was at for 12-ish years was at IDEO. And I would have said I went in as a graphic designer, but I came out as something else or something
Mm-hmm.
more. And when I worked there, I did most of my projects were primarily corporate work and a wide variety of things. But the projects that really stuck with me and that I loved the most ended up being social impact projects that I did while I was there. And so those were the projects where my skill set and my passions like got to come together. And so now that I've been having my own practice, I try as much as possible to align those things in the way that I'm working and to work on
Yeah.
things that I really care about.
Yeah. Was there one catalyst or like what was the one thing that made you want to just start your own practice?
I didn't necessarily set out to start my own practice. I knew I was ready to leave, and I left with a client that, with everyone's blessing, I didn't steal the client. They were like, take them because you can flip on the IDEO machine for 2 weeks for the budget they have, but it could fund a small design studio for 6 months. So
Mm-hmm.
I started doing work on my own and with some others collaboratively, and word of mouth and work kept coming and building. And I was, designing in this space. A lot of the work that I have done is in the adolescent sexual reproductive health space. And
Mm-hmm.
then, gender equity, bodily autonomy. I work now with survivors of sexual trauma. So there's like this weird sort of niche that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of my projects and things have worked with. And I always thought maybe if the right job came along, I would go work there, but that hasn't necessarily happened. And I've been really happy
Mm-hmm.
working for myself and working directly with clients. And, the big difference too about working at a consultancy to the way I work now is at a consultancy, we often put together, here's a strategy. Here are some things. Here's an identity, like here's a book. Now
Mm-hmm.
go implement that in your organization. We're around if you need us and you can pay us more, but bye. And it's very rare that you get to see something and bring it all the way to bringing it to life. And I feel really privileged in working by myself or working as a collaborative. I have been able to like see more products or services make their way into the world and have
Mm-hmm.
gotten to be a part of them, whether it was full-time or part-time or as a guide throughout the work that I've been able to do as a sole proprietor or a
Yeah.
small studio. And so that's been really a big difference as well. And I don't know if that answered your question,
Yeah.
Chris.
No, that answers my. And what's the most difficult part about just running your own shop and just being your own person?
The most difficult thing, because you have to do all the stuff. I have to remember that I need to send an invoice today.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd rather just like work on something that I've got on my desk that needs my attention. But I have to do that. I have to write the
Mm-hmm.
proposals. I have to, do all that business side of things. So that's hard, but I also enjoy it because it's an opportunity to collaborate with a client like really early on, like writing proposals and things. So yeah, I don't love that. And I think the thing that I hate the most about being on my own is, damn, I miss real health insurance.
Yeah, I keep hearing that from a lot of people.
Yeah, I like working for an IDEO had really great benefits and their health insurance was amazing. And I went out on my own, was like, the Affordable Care Act was new. I was like, I believe in that. I'm going to buy something off the exchange. And then as that's been eaten away and I've had to buy single payer plans every year, I see less and less things being able to be covered. I see less and less like hospital systems taking a single payer plan. And also this year, this year will be the first year that my health insurance costs as much as my mortgage.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm not psyched about that. I think
Yeah.
that's the worst thing of working for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully something changes,
Ugh.
but I don't know. So, with the work that you do, it being social impact space, and then there is, so to me, commercial work always tends to have like a very tangible return on investment, or like like a metric of success, where it's like we're gonna do this and it's gonna return X percentage in revenue, profit, whatever. When it comes to social impact work, like I'm curious about how impact is measured.
Yeah. Well, impact is measured in different ways. I can speak to like just a couple projects come to mind
Hmm.
where a very early project for me, and I was still at IDEO when I first started working with this client and later worked with them on my own, is an organization called Power to Decide. And it used to be called a much longer mouthful of a name, but we created a service and online platform called Bedsider. And it is supporting people to make contraception choices about their lives and bodies. And the impetus for doing that work was there was a statistic, and this is like 18, 17 years ago. What was it?
Hmm.
16 years ago. So there was a study done that said 7 out of 10 pregnancies to 18 to 29-year-olds are unintended. And, we want to support people in choice in finding, do they want to, some people want to just leave it up to the universe, and other people want to like have more control about when they have a baby. And so we made this service and tools. And then what you see as impact is you start to see, well, how many people are engaging with the platform, of course, but then you also start to can see where statistics have come down. Like you can see that teen pregnancy statistics have come down. Now, is it just because of this one thing that we helped design? No, there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's like contributing to that. For example, I worked with the Chicago Department of Public Health when I first left IDEO, I took them as a client, and they have a program called the CHAT program, which is Chicago Healthy Adolescents and Teens. And so the health department had a grant, and they're working on um, building a program. There are health department goals. It's like Chicago is #2 in the nation for cases of chlamydia and gonorrhea to 15 to 19-year-olds, or Chicago, Cook County. And so we're #2. Yay, not awesome. So they had this program to go in and do anonymous testing and treatment for STIs in schools, also provide sex ed. And, they work with, it's still going in some capacity, working with Planned Parenthood of Illinois to do the education portion. And they had put together a pilot, and they came to our team to say, like, how do we include the youth voice?
Hmm.
Because of course it was put together by like the health department maybe doesn't have the best tone of voice.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not the most approachable to a 15-year-old or a
Hmm.
16-year-old. And so then design comes in to say, they had these goals. They want to bring this big statistic down. They want to be able to reach young people in schools. And then they have a way of doing it, but then where the impact comes in is like what my team did, is came in and did co-design with young people and asked them, like, just kind of understanding, where are they, what makes something trusted, what questions do they have, what do they already know, what things are they embarrassed to ask, like in an anonymous way. And to be able to take that presentation that is exactly what you imagined. It had like, the most horrible typography and the cheesiest, like super heteronormative, like awful stock photography and kind of scary STI things in it, and say, like, okay, this is where you're at. And it's still the same goal, but then by working with young people and integrating in the things that they were craving, the information they wanted to know, along with like providing this service, it's able to have a bigger impact, meet more people. You see more people testing and treating those STIs, and you're seeing at least, like, I think my goal was where like the goal is to get young people engaged in this when they're being given this at their school. I
Mm.
think the big goal is just like, how do we make this less cringy? How do we make this suck less? Because no one wants to go in and hear some, in your school, if someone's lecturing you about sex ed, that can be super awkward.
Yeah.
So, but if young people have a stake in designing what this might look like or feel like or deliver, then they are more apt to pay attention or maybe get something out of it rather than just feel like they're being like broadcast to.
Yeah.
So impact, I think for that, it's measured in a different way, right? Because then there are statistics because all this is backed up by grants and there's like, there's also the people doing data research underneath it. But what the design is doing is making that more accessible, making it something that is more palatable, perhaps. And then you're measuring impact slightly different. So there's like a lot more qualitative data, and also in the end, you're looking to see, are we affecting that statistic in our city?
Yeah. Huh. And then with a lot of, let's say you're going to a school and you're talking about, or like talking about sexual education, topics that in your work you talk about trauma informed, like being trauma informed. And I know trauma informed, to me, that was a term that I learned about a few years ago. And I believe there's, I think maybe what you did with AIGA Chicago, or there was some event in Chicago that was about trauma informed design. But can you just talk to us about what trauma informed means?
Yeah. So trauma informed design, and maybe if it's okay if I back up and tell you a little bit about how I found this.
Yes.
I did do a talk on trauma informed design with an amazing designer named Rachel Dietkiss, who's based down in Champaign-Urbana, and is social workers who design. And we did this presentation. I want to say it was like 2021, maybe.
May 21st, 2021, Friday, 4 p.m.
Excellent work with the Googles over there. Yeah, so we did a presentation together, and she and I had met through a couple different channels, and I was so excited because she comes from, her background is she is a social worker, worked for the VA for years, and then went into design. So coming from this space where in the mental health and healthcare field, there's something called trauma-informed care. And what trauma-informed care, basically what they're trying to do is not traumatize people through the process of providing care. So they are, you're trying to make it less trauma-informed. And so in my work, especially like I've been working a ton with adolescents and sexual reproductive health, and I was working with a lot of different healthcare practitioners. I was working with nurse midwives or nurses who are riding in these mobile health units and things, and was learning about trauma-informed care. And I started asking myself and my team, like, why aren't we using these same principles in design?
Mm-hmm.
And so I had started adapting that language. There's like 6 principles, which I don't need to necessarily go into with you, but like, unless you want me to. But there's like 6 principles of trauma-informed care. And like, okay, let's translate into what does that mean for design? What does that mean for our process? What does that
Mm-hmm.
mean for the way that we are engaging with folks? What does that
Mm-hmm.
mean for the way that we're recruiting individuals to take part in design research? What does it mean if we're co-designing? And what does it mean for us as a team if
Mm-hmm.
we're working in a space? And so when I met Rachel and both of us were sort of coming from these 2 different sides, I was just like super excited to have a peer who knew so much and has so much experience in this space. And so she's been an amazing like ally and someone I've learned a ton from. And we did that presentation back in 2021. And I think since then, I've been implementing those principles and that way of working into my own projects and things. Trauma informed design is recognizing that trauma exists, that trauma exists, that many people have experienced trauma either firsthand or in their own lives, that our trauma responses can, that trauma response happens when something is super overwhelming or too much, too soon, too fast. Trauma happens when people don't have support or, and it can show up as like it lives in our body as sensation. It can show up as pain. It can show up as tension, numbness, and that it doesn't impact everyone in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing what trauma is and how it's something that surfaces in all these different places in design, and not just in social impact work. I mean, I've witnessed someone be triggered and activated by trauma in like a healthy snacking project. And then, so understanding and acknowledging that is happening, and then being trauma informed is like, okay, in our dealings, we want to make sure that we're creating a safe enough like space for people to engage with us. It's about working with trust and transparency, acknowledging cultural context, honoring lived experience, making sure that folks have a voice and choice in what is happening and what is happening in their lives, and that through design as well. And so that sort of way of working has permeated how I approach projects, how I build teams. And then building on top of that, I think, you and I talked about this once at one of the meetups, because also like the term trauma informed is can sound a little bit like
It's strong.
It's strong. It's trauma forward.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, I've been using the term healing centered a lot more. And there are, amazing folks out there like Dr. Sean Jinray, who has the Flourish Agenda, and they do healing centered engagement worth looking into. But he talks about how, working with young people, the traumatic thing that happened is not it's not like the most interesting thing about you. Trauma happened. Like it's like, that's just one thing that's part of your life. It's not the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you are not the worst thing that happened to you. And I think acknowledging that, and when in a design process, thinking more about healing or how to be sensitive and prepared for trauma, but not necessarily like,
Yeah.
And so I think I because of the work that I'm doing now with Braver Collective, which I'm sure it's on the list.
Yep.
We're working directly with survivors of trauma. And so healing and the way that people heal is also part of like sort of building on top of just a trauma informed, okay, great, we're not going to do any harm, moving from this idea of do no harm, trauma is, we recognize trauma, we're not going to cause more trauma, starting to be more healing centered. So when you're talking about more healing centered work, it's okay, recognizing the persistence of trauma, but then, and committing not to repeat that in the design process or through any of our experiences together. We're also seeking to, through the process of design, like restore a sense of safety, power, self-worth. And we want to, acknowledge people for who they are throughout a design process, and then beyond, not just while you're engaged, we're doing co-design right now. It's also beyond. So thinking about how projects end, thinking about how interactions end, or how a service, once it's stood up, what is the relationship? What do those relationships look like? And how do you move forward even when you're not you're not going to be in contact with these folks every day, but how have you ended things in a way that are making space for like relationship building, or for them to be able to contribute in the future?
Yeah. Okay. I like I like everything that you mentioned, and I think of trauma informed design as a additional layer to what we would call human centered design.
Totally.
But then human centered design, I feel like, has been like just become another like hollow term that's just been appropriated by just about anyone that does like a 1 hour LinkedIn course on like human centered design, and then they add it as a little badge to their profile, and
Totally.
then they get a lot of thumbs up. So how do you I think it would be, to me, like what I really appreciate about this conversation is that it's stuff that we can all be doing, and it isn't something that just being trauma informed doesn't just have to be like working with trauma, like people that have experienced severe trauma. I think we can be trauma informed or healing forward or healing centered in just about everything, whether it's in the design club being an example, or leading an organization or creating a team or doing just graphic design, I feel like it's a heightened sense of awareness and empathy that I think overall just leads to more inclusive and better creative things that could hopefully resonate deeper with people.
I would absolutely agree with that. I think once you start thinking and approaching work in this way,
Hmm.
you can't like, oh, well, throw that out the window. Like
Yeah,
it just changes fundamentally the way that you
yeah,
approach work. And I do have lots of thoughts about human-centered design and all the different ways that people label it and stuff. But it's like I kind of have this sort of sandwich, and it builds on
yeah,
it. There's the principles of visual design and the way that you're approaching communicating, and
yeah,
then like human-centered design, trauma-informed design, and healing-centered is almost a layer on top of that, the way that I've
yeah.
been understanding that for myself. And each builds on these things build on each other. And I'm never going to be a person who anyone who works with me, I'm not going to like pull out a double diamond and be like, and we do this and this and this and this and this. It is a messy process. It is about divergence and convergence and all that, but it's also like very much needs to be about respect and collaboration.
Hmm.
And working in, the process is also important, as much as when you're talking about being healing centered or trauma informed or trauma
Hmm.
responsive, the process of how you got there is almost as important as where you get to,
Hmm.
in
Yeah,
some ways, because the reason you're getting to where you are is because it's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening through co-design. It's happening through the contributions of other professionals and folks with lived experience. And the design in the end is so much stronger because of
hmm,
that. I mean, hopefully it will like meet people where they are, the universal design principle,
yeah,
if you will.
yeah, yeah. The thing that I always challenge human-centered design by asking what human is at the center. And because when we talk about it, sometimes it's like, all right, like, a weapon of mass destruction is human-centered for the people that are pressing the button and like creating awfulness. So to me, the trauma-informed kind of challenges what would be otherwise not humans. Like it's almost like it's the two of them inform one another so that it's so that something good comes out of it, hopefully. Like it,
Hopefully,
yeah.
I think human-centered design, and lots of people have written about human-centered design or design thinking or
Hmm.
whatever, and it always kind of irked me because I would be like, okay, this, or is it participatory design, is it co-design, is it human-centered design, is it design thinking, like circle RTM, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't care. It's like we're working on this issue with these individuals, um,
Hmm.
making sure the right folks, like who needs to be invited to the table, and then however the process, we define the process based on where we are.
Hmm.
And then yes, that should be inherently human centered. But I think when you consider doing it in a trauma responsive way or healing centered way, that inherently takes out the like, it should not be extract. And I
Hmm.
think that's part of like what makes some of the ick
Hmm.
for me about some human centered design stuff. And I worked at IDEO for 12 years, so like I've seen it, saw things evolve even in that space. And some things felt a lot like jazz hands, and other things felt like really powerful and useful. And then I think that to include knowledge of trauma and how to work with humans,
Hmm.
whether they're the person you're designing next to or the person who has lived experience who's joined you, that takes the ick out of it, I guess,
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Because
you talk.
sorry, I was just like, because we've also seen when trauma has happened in design spaces, and there wasn't any sort of knowledge or understanding of what to do or what could happen when someone, what should happen, or how to respond when someone is traumatized.
Yeah. So you talked about co-design, and I know that with my peers, there's people that are very much for co-designing, like they believe that you should be designing with, but then there's another group of people that would say, they are hiring us because we're the experts and we know what's best for them, and that's it. Co-design to me seems like a pretty radical approach to making. And I say radical approach in the sense that, like in education, like we're taught that we become the experts and that at the end we tell the client what they need. So how do you with co-design, to me, like co-designing is all about building trust and giving the person that you're designing with a sense of ownership over the thing that you're building or creating. Would you say that that's like a correct, or like how would you define co-design? And I want to hear you share with us a little bit about trust and how you develop trust with people that may be a little bit closed off, especially when dealing with things that might be triggering.
Oh, there's so many things inside that question,
There
Christian.
there is.
I think, first of all, I just want to respond to the piece about co-design. Co-design does not mean design by committee.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Co-design, it means that, you're involving and centering the individuals who are going to be directly
Yep.
affected by or on the receiving side
Mm-hmm.
of a design or a service, and it is including them and sharing power when making decisions. I don't think it takes anything away from, it's still important that you have designers,
Mm-hmm.
because co-designers are not necessarily, like, they're not a graphic designer or they're not a UX designer, but they can speak to their experience. They can speak to what resonates with them. They can identify red flags or things in a way that the designer who does not have the context can do. And so even like some of my favorite brands and identities that I've developed and worked on over the years are things where we included co-design. And that doesn't necessarily mean they were like picking the logo, but it might be like we're having conversations about what's underneath this. Okay, this is about, within the case of Braver Collective, like we included co-designers in the naming. We included co-design in part of the exploration of the types of imagery and things that people were drawn to and that felt safe. So we're talking about safety or bravery or what speaks community to you. And I've learned so much through those conversations with co-designers that then then we can go back and say, okay, well, let's organize what we heard. This is what we heard. And let's try to translate that using some design skills a bit, and then reflect it back and say, okay, this is what we heard. And that could show up in this way. Here's a few ways that could show up. Let's have a
Mm-hmm.
conversation about it. So you're bringing more things to the table, and it's not just strictly like feedback, yes or no, I don't like purple. It's more like, this is scary when I encounter this type of information in this space. What can we do to just like give me a little bit of foreshadowing of what's to come? Or how can we, I'm afraid of someone looking over my shoulder while I'm reading this. What can we do? And how can we design something into this experience that can help you like
Mm-hmm.
get out of that really quick? So yeah, when it comes to co-design, I think there's so much power uh in these conversations and these co-design sessions with folks. And it's not like we're not designing a final UX during that session necessarily, but we are defining the values and the rules that are like underlying that. And I feel really proud, especially of the Braver Collective work, because that is something that was very much co-designed. And some of our co-designers have come back and have been hired as part of the organization and are
Mm-hmm.
doing some work with us. And when folks tell you, like, they see it, they're like, I remember a conversation about, these things. I remember when we talked about this, and I can see that coming to life in the way the design decisions that were made and in the way this has been rendered and the way that this is showing up. And I think that is really powerful in creating impact and also like showing up in the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think from what so as I was preparing for this interview, I asked our mutual friend Nicolette, I'm like, what's the one thing that I should ask Mary? And her question was all about how great you are at collaborating, and and how you just go about like creating those safe spaces where like good ideas like cultivate or like are fostered. So is collaboration something that's always come natural to you, or like for someone that maybe is listening that struggles with collaborating, like how does someone get comfortable with their own like intuition or with their own sense of like whatever?
I love collaboration. I wouldn't want to work any other way
Hmm.
because I just really believe that, like, on my own,
Yeah.
what I come up with, it might be okay, but it's going to be so much stronger by having other brains and hearts attached to it, and contributing to it. So collaboration is something that's really important to the way that I work. I can also say that, like, that it is a practice, and even as a younger designer, I think, and especially as a younger visual designer, there's this preciousness and this nervousness about, I can't show anything unless it's really good
Hmm.
because somebody's gonna fire me or say it's crappy and I'm gonna feel awful. There's this, like, it has to be perfect when I put it out in the world. And I do think that, like, that is one thing that working at IDEO really squished out of me, because so much of the conversations that are happening in collaboration, like, if I'm sitting at a table with an architect and like an anthropologist and an engineer, we all have different skill sets,
Hmm.
and I'm going to learn something from these folks, but also, like, how do I get my idea across? I've drawn this horrible sketch, or like, because I'm very much about, like,
Hmm.
something that I've always enjoyed is like taking the spaghetti mess of all the data and all the information and being like, okay, how can I, like, work on this and make it into something that is visually digestible.
Yeah.
And so that practice of sharing things before they're ready, just sharing rough ideas and being comfortable being vulnerable and saying, like, I don't have the answer, or, what about this, and putting something, because I'm a visual person, putting something down on paper, and just like, I'm always holding random sketches up
Yeah.
to Zoom calls now. We're like, what if we did something like this? Because then the beauty of that, of not waiting till something is precious, or not waiting and trying to do that all on my own, is that I get feedback and I get new perspectives on what that is, and then I can revise that and make it stronger. And so I think collaboration is just an extension of that, and co-design as well, because it's about those conversations and
Hmm.
that experience, and whether it's professional or lived, that's coming from the other people in your team or whatever. It's going to make it's in service of
Yeah.
the what you're designing, and it's going to make that much stronger.
Hmm.
I don't know, I love collaborating with folks, and like, I don't want to be ever want to be the one to have all the answers. I really see my role as creating a platform where many voices are welcome, and that folks can contribute and feel that their contribution is valued, um and can see themselves in the work as well.
Yeah. I agree. I like collaborating, but sometimes I hate collaborating.
Oh, well, sometimes it also depends on who you're collaborating with.
Exactly. It depends on who
Sometimes,
you're
like,
collaborating.
you're like, this person's voice is nails on a chalkboard to my soul, but then you figure out a way to make it
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Braver Collective, Director of Design, 5 years, beautiful brand identity done by Field of Practice.
Ish.
Ish.
It's The actual identity was done by Tom at Firebelly.
Okay.
We worked with Firebelly on the naming and the brand, and then and I worked with the studio and was part of the team as like art director and facilitator for co-design in that. And then we were really happy with the visual work, and then decided to take it in-house for the next phase, which was expanding on the strategy and building the site and bringing that to life. And
Hmm.
I really had wanted to also work with Field of Practice on that. Worked with Nermeen and Kristen, who are like the dream team of
Yeah.
humans to work with. They're so amazing. And so we worked on all the strategy and then expanding beyond like some of the visual identity that that Firebelly had set in motion, and then taking that really and like building on that and making it real. And so like Field of Practice, we like did strategy and site design and UX and UI. So like that was a collaborative process, and we worked with co-designers throughout that whole process as well. But I do want to give credit where credit's due. Like the Firebelly folks were a lovely partner right at the beginning to
Yeah.
help us get to that identity, and stretched themselves to include co-design into the process. As a studio, I think that was something that they hadn't necessarily done at that time in the way that we really felt that it was important as an organization to do, and they went with it.
Yeah.
It was fun.
I love it. So the year is just around the corner, the new year. We're wrapping up 2025. And I think these last few years have really, to me, I think design is facing an identity crisis at the moment. I think there's so much things that are like so much is being questioned, and I think values are there's also an opportunity to redefine what values are and what they mean. And I would like to know, what do you feel is the responsibility of design today?
That's such a big question. The responsibility of design is to not be assholes and not suck,
Okay.
and to not make things worse, to use our powers for something good, hopefully, whatever good means. Gosh, I think it's about respect and using, when I say using our powers for good, I mean like as designers, I think we are creating things that are part of culture. We have the opportunity to call attention to things that can be catalysts for change, that can be support for humans who need support, that we can do things ethically and with empathy.
I like that. I'm writing this down. I could always I could always just listen to the recording, but you're saying cool stuff.
Oh, I don't remember. I blacked out there for a second.
You said Christian is awesome.
He is.
Um,
Christian's awesome.
so what's like your so what keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at well, I already mentioned health insurance.
Yeah.
What keeps me up at night? I worry about the future of
Hmm.
the future that my kids are going to live in, and I worry about immediate needs like my kiddo is non-binary and trans, and I worry about them in America right now. I worry about gender affirming healthcare, and that is something that definitely keeps me up at night. And I want my kid and young people who are growing up today to like be able to be themselves in the world that we're building, and that is kind of scary right now.
And when you're faced with that sense of fear or uncertainty, where do you turn to for hope?
Where do I turn to for hope? It depends on the day. Sometimes I turn to escapism for hope. I'm like, let me just read something that is completely not. Um, of course, I do read a lot of. I do have this weird obsession with like kind of post-apocalyptic things, so maybe
Hmm.
that's not hopeful. I That same kid, I love talking to them, and I turn to. I am I see so many folks in not just the design community, but in Chicago who are passionate and unapologetically themselves and showing up for each other. And that really gives me a lot of hope when I see folks showing up, whether they're seeing all the neighborhood out in the street during the
Hmm.
awfulness of the Midway shit, the ice storm that's been happening here, or that seems to have died down a bit, but just seeing the whole community come out, I think
Hmm.
seeing that in times right now where there's so many kind of scary things happening, that does give me hope. It gives me faith in humans. And yeah, and then hearing, I get to spend a lot of time with young teens right now because I have one. And so kind of hearing the way that they're looking at the world and the things that are normal and completely acceptable and amazing to those young people is also super hopeful, because I
Hmm.
just want to, I want that fire to keep burning. And so yeah, I think that is something that
Yeah.
gives me hope.
Yeah, we have a lot of young listeners for this podcast that are either first year design students or people or just designers that are just graduating and they're going out into the world looking to either get a job or make some kind of impact. What would be your call to action for someone that is at that point in their lives where blank canvas?
Yeah, try everything. Get out of your comfort zone. And I think it doesn't have to just be social impact work to have
Hmm.
impact. There's so many ways to have impact, and that can happen in a lot of different contexts. That can happen in really corporate context. The
Hmm.
decisions you might make as a design team can have ripple effects, whether that is our sustainability ripple effects or trauma informed and supportive ripple effects. I
Hmm.
mean, as a young designer, I think that was something that I really believed was like, I can go places now. Like, I want to live in this other city. I'm going to live in this other country. I'm going to go and try and do design in this way. And I think, as a young person right now, especially because everything is scary and sucky right now, like, try all the stuff, do all the things.
Yeah, I like that. As we wrap up, I have a few rapid fire questions for you. Can you share with us just briefly what is Braver Collective? What's their mission?
Well, Braver Collective is a platform that's dedicated to helping survivors of sexual trauma find their own unique pathways to healing. So we have a website, and we create and share accessible, reliable, and trauma responsive and shame-free online space and tools dedicated to supporting survivors' voice and choice. It's a resource that as survivors, we've longed for. It's every aspect of the organization has been co-designed, from the digital presence to the organization itself. And that's all been shaped by the wisdom and lived experience of individuals, trauma experts, healers, supporters, survivors, and also designing for this space and creating awareness in the space of sexual trauma. It's an opportunity to make change and push back against stigma, and to have an impact on in a space that affects nearly a third of all Americans. So what Braver Collective does is we give folks a platform to share their stories, and we have vetted resources and survivor to survivor advice. And we are showing up on college campuses now. We are a digital organization and we all live in different states, but Braver Collective is sort of like embracing all the different ways in which healing can happen in tiny steps and big steps, and supporting folks to find and connect with community or with things that could be supportive to them, you know,
Yeah,
their choice, their voice.
yeah. That's great that you're doing that. I feel like that definitely fills a big gap for a lot of folks in the world. So That's I think I think often the to me that showcases the possibility of design and how it goes beyond what we're taught to as like a cool looking poster or a cool packaging. Like as a as a design educator, I feel like we don't do enough of talking about the possibility that design can bring and how it can, shape and impact people's lives in a deeply profound way. So I think the fact that you're pairing a strong mission with also like aesthetically pleasing brand and communications, I think that really is like the perfect intersection of like socially driven, impactful work. So,
Thank you.
and for people that want to learn more about that, we'll include the link to that organization in the chat or in the description for this episode.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about that work for like 4 hours. So
Yeah, maybe that's I know you've talked about it in the past. So not with the Chicago Graphic Design Club, but maybe that's something that maybe in 2026 we can find a way to make that happen for our community. Yep. So shifting over to some lighthearted rapid fire questions. I would love to know, what are you currently reading?
I just reread The Parable of the Sower,
Okay.
Apocalypse Amazingness. That book is awesome. And then just like some purely escapism crap
Mm-hmm.
uh sometimes. Yeah. And then I just also just took like a class in healing centered engagement. So I've been reading a lot of around that too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What does your algorithm serve you on YouTube?
My algorithm is so messed up because I never bother turning on safe search when I'm doing stuff for work. So my algorithm has always been weird because like, it might be I'm working on a project where I'm like looking up, or I remember once I was planning for a photo shoot about contraception. So like I was buying just like every brand of condom, every type of contraception that I could get my hands on that wasn't prescription, and then also prescription. And my algorithm for years has just been ridiculous. So I might get like I get all kinds of stuff.
Okay. What makes you cry?
Everything. Parenting makes me cry sometimes. Seeing beautiful things and seeing people show up for each other makes me cry.
So you're naturally like a empathic person.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. What makes you laugh?
Jokes about poop. Terrible. I don't know. My my husband always says that my family always talks about the most inappropriate stuff at the dinner table, and that would not be wrong. I'm excited to see my brothers over the winter break.
Yeah. And what are you currently listening to? What do you listen to? Are you podcasts, music, radio?
I have been listening to a lot of audiobooks. Like always, I have an audiobook, and then I have been we took like a family trip or took a road trip recently, so I'm always making mixes in the car, and and then against my will I'm listening to the soundtrack for Has Been Hotel over and over and over again while my child belts it out at the top of their lungs. So
Very cool. And then let's talk briefly about Chicago. What do you love about Chicago? What makes Chicago special? And if someone were to run into you in the wild, where may they find you?
mm. I love Chicago. I grew up in Michigan, and I spent over a decade living in San Francisco and then a little bit in London as well. And I wanted to come back to the Midwest. And I was excited to come back to Chicago, even though I'm not back to, but back to the Midwest and live in Chicago. I've now been here 15 years. And I have found just an amazing community here, amazing community of designers. And I think there is this like just a general sense of solidarity and support that I get in Chicago that I maybe didn't get in other cities where I lived, but I'm also in a different place in my life than I was then. So,
Hmm.
that's always different. There, I mean, I love being near the lake as a person who grew up in Michigan, though I wasn't necessarily next to Lake Michigan then. I love being able to go to the lake. I love being able to drive an hour and a half to where my parents live now. And I love my neighborhood. And if you're finding me in the wild, chances are I'm walking around Logan Square with my dog Chicken. I leave the neighborhood sometimes, but like since I work from home, I'm in my home office right now, and I am always like, I love that I can walk to so many amazing things that are just really close by. So that's generally where you'll find me. It's like getting coffee or a bookstore, any store that will let Chicken come in, and especially if they have dog treats, because
Yeah.
she's such a good dog. Um, so I don't know. I'm around Logan Square a lot, and I love being in a city with seasons again. And I know the snow is ugly right now, but I love the snow. I love being able to like crunch around outside. So.
Nice. And then speaking of home office, what are things that you can't live without that you always have nearby when you're working? Your Mary's essentials. All right. So a container of
A container
water.
of liquid beverage. I've got my desk itself is built into a closet.
Okay.
And so the closet, it's like it's all bookshelves in front of me. So I'm surrounded by tons of stuff. I am definitely like more of a maximalist person. I have stuff. But
Hmm.
I have the things like the water, two pairs of glasses, because now I have the close up and far away glasses
Yeah.
because old. Um, I've got, some candles over here and a box of Kleenex and lots of water and the grossest, crustiest mouse pad that is a piece of paper that ever existed. But I think I've probably had this for like 8 years and I just keep using
That's cool. So I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. This is the last episode of 2025, so that's pretty cool.
it. Well, thank you for having me and for chatting and asking such nice and engaging questions.
What are you looking forward to in 2026? Do you make resolutions or goals or any of that stuff?
I'm not a resolution maker because I think as a person who manages their ADHD, I'm not good at resolutions because that resolution may change, and I'm
Okay.
open to things changing always. I am looking forward to, it's new year, new start on, what am I going to get to work on next year? Who am I going to get to collaborate with? I'm looking forward to finding out what high school my kid's going to get into, and I'm looking forward to summer.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I hope that you and I keep crossing paths, and hopefully in the future, you and I can work on something together.
That would be amazing.
Yep. Cool. That was a great conversation. Thank you, as always, for sticking around till the end. Like I said in the beginning, if you enjoy Underscore and these conversations, we appreciate your support simply by having you leave us a rating wherever you listen. To learn more about us, visit www.chicagographicdesign.club. Thank you.